Hey there! Did you know Kroger always gives you savings and rewards on top of our lower-than-low prices? And when you download the Kroger app, you'll enjoy over $500 in savings every week with digital coupons. And don't forget fuel points to help you save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Want to save even more? With a Boost membership, you'll get double fuel points and free delivery. So shop and save big at Kroger today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Savings may vary by state. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Why wait to see if you'll get something you like this Valentine's Day when you can go to BlueNile.com and find something you'll love? Whether you're looking to treat yourself to a little winter sparkle or show a galentine how much you appreciate them, Blue Nile offers a wide selection of high-quality designs, expert guidance, and free 30-day returns for the ultimate peace of mind. You can even design your own jewelry. Right now, save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Penscast Mailbag. I am your host, Garrett Bahana, and as always, alongside me is fellow contributing writer over at Pensburg.com. He is the co-host of the Penscast and the Penscast Mailbag. It is Robbie Noggle. Robbie, we don't have Penguins news to break down, but I was watching those games. We're recording this on Monday night, the day after the two Game 7s. Between Colorado and Seattle and Boston and Florida. And before we get into the mailbag, those two Game 7s, talk about upset. From a neutral perspective, we obviously don't have dogs in that fight, but for the Bruins, I mean, the success that they had in the regular season, for it to all go up in flames in 7 games, for the defending Stanley Cup champion, the Avalanche, to lose to the upstart Kraken in their first ever playoff series in just their second year of existence. You can't ask for anything more if you were a neutral watching that game, and you got your money's worth in terms of the excitement of the first round. I can't remember who said it. I saw it on Twitter a couple of years ago. It was an NHL coach at the time that said the 2 weeks of the first round matchups are the best 2 weeks in all of hockey, and perhaps all of professional sport, because there's so much unpredictability, there's so much chaos, and all of that was on full display last night. Did you have any thoughts? I mean, looking at what the Bruins accomplished and what the Avalanche were trying to do, what were you thinking if you didn't see it last night? If you woke up this morning and saw the score line, can you believe that both Boston and Colorado, the two probably biggest favorites in this tournament, are already out?
In those two games, especially the Boston game, because it just felt like, I mean, Colorado, defending champs, it's really hard to do. A lot of injuries they battled this year. And Seattle, a great upstart story, but the Boston series, it just felt like, if you remember back in 2019 when the Tampa Bay Lightning were swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets after what was the greatest regular season in NHL history until the Bruins came along, that didn't even feel as shocking as this, because Boston, they're up 3-1. They won both games on the road, completely in control, and they just melted down. It felt like as soon as any kind of adversity came their way, they completely melted. But they didn't really deal with much adversity this year in terms of on-ice struggles. I mean, they just completely dominated everyone. Even in games where they didn't play great, they still found a way to win. Everything was clicking for them, and now nothing. They are in the same position as 8 other teams, and that doesn't count the 14 other ones that were already in the offseason prior to the playoffs. So the President's Trophy, I mean, that's an accomplishment. There's no doubt about that. Being that good for 82 games is not easy. You have to, with the numbers they have, you have to be good from game 1 to game 82. And they were, and it just, there's going to be a lot written about Boston in the next coming weeks, trying to figure out what the heck went wrong. But you can write all you want, but sometimes it's just one team gets the better of the other over the course of 7 games, and that's what happened, and it was wild. It really was, to kind of just even that game 7, they had it until a minute left, and Florida ties it, and then wins it in overtime, and it's hockey's weird, but hockey can give you those kind of moments, and they're pretty incredible when they happen.
All right. Well, with that out of the way, we will dive straight into our mailbag. It is a pretty big mailbag this week. I believe it's 16 questions, if I remember correctly. Robbie, like always, we will get you started with question number 1 for those interested in contributing to this mailbag edition of the Penscast. As we roll on through the off season, you can do so by following our Twitter account at PenguinsFFSN. Every week, we will send out a mailbag tweet asking for your participation in this episode, in this podcast episode. These mailbag podcasts are all about the listeners who take the time to listen to what we have to say and what we ramble on. So we want to continuously give back to the listeners who keep coming back week in and week out and answer some of their burning questions. Robbie, like I said, you will get question number 1, and we will go back and forth. Question number 1 does come from Brendan, and it's a pretty good question looking into the future. What do you think Sidney Crosby's next contract looks like? And Brendan here gives you a couple of examples. Do you think he goes with what is estimated as true value, which is, as Brendan puts it, $8.7 million for over three to 4 seasons, maybe? Maybe he takes a lesser kind of Evgeny Malkin-esque deal, maybe 5.5 for 2 to 3 years as he gets up there in age and closer to the age of 40. Does he possibly retire at the end of this contract, which Brendan does not hope to see? Or do you think he goes absolutely dirt cheap to trying to surround himself to win another Stanley Cup?
I don't think he's going to go dirt cheap, because I don't think that would necessarily even be fair for him. I like the Malkin deal in that ballpark, the Malkin Letang kind of deal. Again, it'll all be depending on, I think him and Malkin want to try to go out together if it's possible. Crosby still has, after this, he still has 2 years left, so he can't even sign a new deal until next summer. So we're a little ways off that yet, but I think it'll be in that $6 million range. I really do think it'll be like that. Maybe he gets a little bit more because he's the captain, and maybe he gets a bit more, but overall, I think you see him somewhere in the 2-3 year range, 3-4 years maybe, around $6-7 million, somewhere in there. A little bit of a downgrade in pay, but at that point, I think that he's okay with that. Don't think he retires quite yet, unless something would happen that he just does an injury or something. But I really think that you'll see a 3 to 4 year deal around that $6 million number. Question number 2 from Brendan. Zucker made it seem like he wants to stay here. What do you think is the lowest he will sign for? I say we give him a Russ-like contract duration to bring down the cap hit. Who cares if he's a shell in year 6? We could probably eat half the salary and trade him for a third. Brendan suggests a 6-year contract at $3.5 million per year.
Jason Zucker is going to be there's so many question marks with this team heading into this offseason. Goaltending, defense, what to do with Jason Zucker. The new general manager is going to have his hands full. We had talked, I imagine Robbie and we had talked previously, whether it was a mailbag segment or what have you, regarding Jason Zucker's next contract at some point over the last however many weeks we've been doing the podcast now. Now that the season is in the rearview mirror, I'm so curious because his cap hit was 5.5, and for a long time, Penguins fans, myself included, were saying he is making way too much money. I know Jim Rutherford didn't sign him to that contract when he traded for him from the Minnesota Wild, so that does not fall on Jim Rutherford's shoulders. He was making 5.5, and we were all saying he gets injured too much and he is not worth the price tag. This is probably going to be Jason Zucker's final contract, or final big contract, I should say. At 31 years old, it gets kind of sketchy because you don't really want to be handing out massive contracts to guys who are already over the age of 30. But kind of like what Brendan says, at this point, you should stay committed to this core for the next, 2, 3, 4 years at max. If it means giving Zucker a 5 or 6 year extension, then so be it. because the top six is not the issue. Assuming Jason Zucker can stay healthy for the next couple of seasons while Crosby and Malkin are still producing as elite centers, I really don't care what it takes. We know the salary cap is going to go up. We know that the general manager is probably going to shed some other contracts from this roster as well, perhaps maybe Mikael Granlund as an example. So I really, at this point, I don't care if it's a 5 or 6 year deal. I wouldn't be surprised if it is, if his cap hit stays relatively the same. If he signs for 3, 4, 5 years at maybe 5.2, 5.5, 5.1, somewhere in that range, I would not be surprised if he, because of the season he had, if he maintains his current cap hit or close to it and signs for maybe 3, 4, 5 seasons. Perhaps he takes a hometown discount. I don't know. Some players are very willing to do that. Other players obviously are chasing the money, and that's their prerogative. They are absolutely entitled to do that. I think you should get as much money as you can. It's a very, very interesting scenario. I am all for bringing Jason Zucker back essentially at any cost. Now, obviously not 7, 8, 9 million, obviously, and he knows he's not worth that himself, but 5, 5.5, maybe 6 at most for 4, 5, 6 years, because like Brendan said, at that time, near the end of the contract, all of these players are either going to be retired or at the very end of their rope anyway. So maximize what you can in the short term and worry about the long-term ramifications when you get to that bridge. Question number 3, also from Brendan. Hunter Hodes from the Locked On Penguins podcast was saying his top 2 priorities are buying out Mikael Granlund and acquiring a left-handed defenseman. Brendan disagrees with both of these points, but has 2 questions for you, Robbie. So it's a twofer, 2 for 1. Do you believe that the Penguins could get anything in a potential trade for Mikael Granlund, even potentially a reduced draft pick for less than what we paid for? Or even a second rounder, but perhaps take 25% of Granlund's contract, his cap hit, for the remaining duration of Granlund's contract. Brendan is not a fan of buyouts, even though his cost is not too bad. Additionally, in terms of a potential return on a Granlund trade, he wants to know, Robbie, what are your thoughts on the left-handed defenseman? Where does that fall on your list of team needs? For Brendan, I think we have a lot of in-house options, and he gives a potential depth chart listing either Marcus Pettersson with Chris Letang, P.O. Joseph with Jeff Petrie, and Ty Smith with Jan Ruda, or Jan Ruda potentially with Letang, Peterson and Petrie together, and P.O. Joseph and Ty Smith or Mark Friedman. So a lot of information there to digest. Essentially, Robbie, do you think we can get anything for Mikael Granlund? And how important is it for the Penguins to upgrade their defense?
So we'll start with the Granlund point here that Brendan makes, and I'm with Hunter on this. They got to get rid of Mikael Granlund somehow. I definitely think you could get a pick back from Mikael Granlund. I just think that it's going to cost you a draft pick to get rid of him, and unless you eat a decent chunk of that salary. I know it's only 2 more years, but I mean, the price to buy him out's not that bad. I don't know what if he has any draft stock at all, to be honest. He was that bad after coming to Pittsburgh, and you're dealing from a desperate situation that everybody's going to be know that you're just trying to get rid of him because it was a mistake. So you're not dealing with a very strong hand there, and I would much rather keep that pick if it meant trading away a pick to get rid of him, to package Mikael Granlund and a pick. Even if you're getting some kind of pick in return, you're going to be giving away the more valuable asset there. So unless you find a general manager that's willing to part with a pick and just to get Mikael Granlund in return, then roll with it. But other than that, I'd take the buyout every day of the week. That's the way that I've been leaning since the season ended, and there's nothing that has popped up that has changed my mind on that. To point number 2, the left-handed defenseman, yeah, it's going to be a need. Now, how they go about that all remains to be seen. Chris Letang's partner was a left-handed Brian Dumoulin, but Brian Dumoulin, again, not an offensive force, but provided obviously solid defense. He was a great defender in his prime. Slipped a bit at the end, but that's pretty much what we've been harping on the last 2 seasons, so not going to focus too much on that. I like the idea of trying Pedersen with Letang, but I think either way, there's going to be some kind of reinforcement brought in on that blue line. Where that person plugs in exactly and who that person is remains to be seen, obviously, a few weeks until we really get into that kind of discussion. But I think that at some point you're going to see a left-handed defenseman brought in, whether that's by trade or by free agency. We don't know at this moment, but there's going to be a lot of roster moves this offseason, and that is just going to be one of, well, I guess technically Mikael Granlund and the left-handed defenseman are just going to be two of what is likely going to be many, many moves reshaping this team when the new front office is brought in. Question number 4, again from Brendan. The NHL is Canadian and American. The majority of players are Canadian and second most are American, but when 2 Canadian teams play, it's only "O Canada" sung as the national anthem. Ditto about 2 United States teams playing and the Star Spangled Banner being sung. It should be both every game, in Brendan's opinion.
The more I thought about this kind of question, I mean, first off, unrelated to Brendan's question, I think "O Canada" slaps as like a national anthem. Living in Pittsburgh and obviously not playing playing in Canada against Canadian teams, you obviously don't hear "O Canada" all that much, but comparing the 2 national anthems, give me "O Canada" over the Star Spangled Banner 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It's so much better of a national anthem. Just my opinion. Now, should both anthems be played? I get why the league does it. I imagine it's basically just because for geographical differences. If the Sharks and Kings are playing each other in California, is it really necessary to play "O Canada"? I think maybe it would be a kind gesture for, like Brendan says, a lot of the Canadian players, the majority of which are Canadian. So maybe it would be a nice gesture for the league to do. I know it would only take up an extra minute and a half in pregame ceremonies and whatnot throughout the regular season and postseason. So I don't have a problem with it if you wanted to implement the dual national anthem strategy here. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I don't really think of national anthems when I'm thinking of NHL games, but I can understand where the thought comes from, why, based on the Canadian and American player discrepancy, the difference between the two in the league, why Brendan is calling for the need, or the want, I should say, to have both of these anthems played in the National Hockey League. Question number 5, I believe it's the last question from Brendan this week. And it's not really a question, it's more or less a statement, Robbie. I wouldn't have a problem with this. I know we have spitballed some things in the past about getting our listeners more involved during the summer months, but Brendan wants to do a mock draft podcast with a few of the top mailbag contributors. So we have Brendan. Brian is constantly submitting questions to us. We've had Snail coming back week in and week out and submitting some questions to us. So Robbie, I can't say that I'm too incredibly well versed in the NHL draft scene. I might have to recruit someone like Jesse Marshall to come in and give me his opinion for all of these prospects. But what are your thoughts, Robbie, on perhaps doing something like this as we get closer to the draft?
We've discussed on the podcast or just between us of different ideas for content, especially in the summer when it kind of dries up a little bit. I don't know much about the draft. I mean, outside of the names at the beginning, and obviously we're going to have something to talk about with the Penguins picking somewhere in that first round, and with the lottery coming up here next week and stuff like that. So we will have stuff to talk about that way, but we have some listeners that want to get in on a mock draft. Hey, I'm all on board. Question number 6. Now we switch over to Brian, as previously mentioned. If the Toronto Maple Leafs were to move on from Kyle Dubas this offseason, and the Penguins did end up making him our next general manager, do you think he'd have some pull in maybe getting Matthews to Pittsburgh somehow when his contract is up in Toronto?
I hate to be the bearer of bad news for Brian. I think the dream of Kyle Dubas to Pittsburgh was extinguished when the Maple Leafs eliminated the Lightning and advanced to the second round for the first time since 2004. while that kind of maybe puts a damper on the Kyle Dubas to Pittsburgh train, maybe it doesn't. Who knows? We'll have to see how the offseason plays out when the Stanley Cup is awarded. As it pertains to Austin Matthews, however, whether it's Kyle Dubas there or another general manager, I believe it's going to be that general manager's priority to make sure Austin Matthews does not leave the city of Toronto. I don't know if Matthews has a personal attachment to Dubas or vice versa. I would imagine when Matthews' contract expires at the end of the 2023-24 season that he re-ups in Toronto. I don't think he'd come to Pittsburgh. If he does leave Toronto, it wouldn't be the first time a major player leaves Toronto to go elsewhere. If he does leave Toronto, the only place I could see him going would be Arizona, because I know he's a native of Arizona. I always thought it would be like a cool, maybe not Cinderella story, but a cool story nonetheless, with the Coyotes struggling for so many years, to have a homegrown talent come and basically lead that team as its captain. Austin Matthews obviously being one of the best players in the league. That would provide a jolt in the arm for the Coyotes for sure. Whether or not Dubas comes to Pittsburgh, I doubt he brings Matthews with him, as much as we would want that, because Matthews is just hitting his prime, and it would be quite the baton pass from Crosby to Matthews, eventually becoming Pittsburgh's number one center. We can all dream, and at the very least, if it doesn't happen in real life, you can go on the NHL video game and trade for Matthews and put him in a Pittsburgh sweater. So you may not have the real thing, but the virtual thing is, well, for now, it's just going to have to do. Here's an interesting question regarding Sidney Crosby once again. What do you think Crosby does when he finally hangs up the skates?
So I kind of had two trains of thought on this. One, Crosby's dedicated basically his entire life to hockey. So by the time he retires, let's say he retires at 40. He basically dedicated 40 years of playing hockey. He just, for at least a year, just disappears and nobody hears from him. He just goes up to Nova Scotia or wherever he vacations and does absolutely nothing for a year. Or not nothing, but is just completely away from the spotlight for a year just to step away from hockey. My second train of thought is Sidney Crosby is so obsessed with hockey, he can't stay away for that long. Whether or not that means working somehow in the Penguins organization, which I think is something that is very possible, assuming Fenway Sports Group would want to have him around, which I think they would. My two trains of thought are he's dedicated so much time to hockey that he's going to take a year away to unwind, get away from it. But the other part of me saying that he is so obsessed with hockey that he could not possibly stay away that long. Again, maybe he says he's going to step away, and then it comes October, and the next thing you know, you see him at the Penguins training facility working out with some of the players. I don't know what he'll do. Again, Sidney Crosby has been obsessive about the sport for his entire life. By the time he retires, one thinks that maybe he just wants to step away from the game and relax. But maybe he's just so obsessed with the game that he feels like he still has something to give as a mentor, scout, development coach, something that he can't fully step away, and we see him in the Penguins organization as some kind of coach or scout or something, just so he can still be around the game. Question number 8 from Brian again. Obviously, Marc-Andre Fleury is more beloved in Pittsburgh, but bringing him back next season and what he claims to be his last season would not help the team at all.
I tend to agree. Acquiring Fleury or bringing him back to Pittsburgh would just be a lot of sentimental feeling at this point. However, just today, as I was researching, it looks like Fleury put the kibosh on any sort of trade rumors, saying that he is not going anywhere. If this is indeed his final season, the upcoming 23-24 season, it looks like he will remain with the Minnesota Wild. He said, quote, "I'm tired of moving. I'm not going anywhere." So if that's it, then perhaps his final year will come with the Minnesota Wild. I think eventually he will retire. He's obviously going to be remembered as a Pittsburgh Penguin. That's where obviously the majority of his success came from. And I will not be surprised if he retires as a Penguin. But as far as his playing career goes, if his word is to be believed, if he knows in his heart of hearts that this will be his last season, then it looks like what he says goes. I mean, he has moved around quite a bit since leaving Pittsburgh, and it is a pain to pick up and take your belongings to a new place. So he apparently is not going anywhere, even if his role next season is more of a backup with Gustafsson really taking the mantle and the starters load. So I don't think he'll be coming back to Pittsburgh, but if he does, I would imagine it would be for like a ceremonial retirement kind of thing. I don't think he's going to be playing for the Penguins really again, obviously, at this point in his career. Question number 9 for you, Robbie, comes from Brian. If the rumors are true that Winnipeg Jets goaltender Connor Hellebuyck does not want to be a part of a rebuild, and the Jets go that route, they go the rebuild route, would you rather make a push for Hellebuyck rather than trying to acquire Nashville goaltender UC Saros?
Either or. Honestly, when the Hellebuyck news came out, I think the minds in Pittsburgh it immediately went to, oh, we got to make a this is something we got to at least kick the tires on. And Adam Gretz wrote a piece for Penscast on Monday, basically saying the exact same thing, that the Penguins have to at least make a phone call, and I completely agree with that. Now, Hellebuyck, a little bit different situation than Saros contract-wise. Saros a restricted free agent, whereas Connor Hellebuyck has a year left on his current deal before he hits the free agent market. So there would be contract issues to work out with either of them, though Hellebuyck would be under contract for at least next season. So it wouldn't be an immediate need to get done with that deal in place that he'd be coming over on. But no, I think Hellebuyck would be a completely suitable goaltender in Pittsburgh, depending on the price, obviously. So yeah, they have to do their due diligence. It certainly sounds like Hellebuyck has no desire to be a part of a rebuild project in Winnipeg. And if you listen to any quotes that came out of that locker room after their elimination from the playoffs, it sounds like there's a bunch going on up there. It doesn't sound like a great situation, and it seems like there's going to be quite a bit of turnover this offseason. Question number 10 from Brian. Do you like the signing of Alex Nylander to a one-year deal? He showed some promise in the lineup, and cheap young players with upside are what the Penguins need.
I agree with Brian in that the cheap young players part with upside is what we need. Here's what I found interesting about the Nylander deal. It's a 1-year, one-way deal. So my thought is, well, first off, there was no general manager to even sign or offer or sign the contract extension. So I don't know who was going to Nylander and saying, hey, we have this contract. Do you want it? Maybe Mike Sullivan, maybe an FSG representative. Either way, Alex Nylander is signed through the 2023-24 season, and it's a 1-year, one-way deal. The one-way part is interesting because it suggests to me that Nylander, at least in the beginning of the season, is going to get a shot, perhaps in the bottom 6. Now, that doesn't mean he can't be, with the one-way deal, you would imagine he would spend at least a portion of the season in the NHL. It doesn't mean he can't be sent to the AHL Penguins. He would have to go through waivers. But if that's the case, Robbie, then why wouldn't the Penguins have signed him to a 2-way deal to make the transaction, the recall process easier on their end? So the one-way deal, perhaps I'm just looking into it too much and he will be in Wilkes-Barre next season. That's definitely a possibility because it's not like teams are knocking down the door to acquire Alex Nylander's services. But at the very least, the contract the terminology was interesting in that it is a one-way deal. If Nylander does carve out a spot in training camp and preseason and earns a spot in the NHL lineup, like Brian says, it's what we need. I think Nylander is 24, 25, 26 years old, around there. So a cheap winger on a very cheap deal is absolutely what the Penguins need to try and fill out this bottom 6. Any bottom 6 is going to be better. The bar was set so low last season. So we'll see what Nylander can do, perhaps in a more extended role, if he does earn a shot with the NHL club heading into next season. Question number 11, also from Brian. Robbie, what are your thoughts about bringing Tyler Bertuzzi to Pittsburgh this offseason?
Yeah, if you watch Tyler Bertuzzi at all in the playoffs here, even leading up to the playoffs, once he got traded to Boston, the kind of guy that he kind of does everything. He had a great playoff series with the Bruins. Now, I think Boston's going to do a good bit of work to try to get him to remain in Boston. you could do a lot worse than Tyler Bertuzzi on your roster. So depending on what the Penguins have money-wise, what other needs they need to fill, Bertuzzi would be, I think, a terrific option to at least take a look at and see what he would command on the open market. He may be a little too expensive after this kind of end-of-season run into the playoffs he went on, and I think Boston's going to make a very hard push to keep him in the Bruins uniform. But, hey, if push comes to shove and he hits the open market, whoever the Penguins general manager is at the time, I think needs to be making a phone call to Tyler Bertuzzi's agent and seeing what kind of contract demands are and see if he'd be willing or open to coming to Pittsburgh, because I think he would look really good in that roster alongside the likes of Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Gensel, and all them. Question number 12 from Brian. How young is too young to take your kid to a pop punk show? My girlfriend and I were thinking of taking our daughter, who will be 2 in July, to see All Time Low at Stage AE in June.
Well, Brian, as the foremost expert on pop punk, I will say, I mean, obviously your 2-year-old is not going to remember a thing. If you can't find a babysitter and have to take her, then, hey, you have to do what you have to do. I went to see Angels and Airwaves, which is Tom DeLonge's side project, back in 2021. And he's up there on stage. And if you know anything about Tom DeLonge and his history with Blink-182, his performances on stage and some of the banter he does in between songs can be kind of raunchy. I mean, that's kind of the reputation that they developed as they skyrocketed to fame in the late 90s and early 2000s. So there were a couple of younger kids there at that show. And DeLonge's up there, F this, F that. Things that I don't want to say here, obviously, to keep this PG. If I was in your situation, Brian, and if you want to take her and you want to do that with her and like make a memory with her, then sure, that's fine too. So take a couple of pictures. I'm sure she'll be fine. If nothing else, like you'll tell her when she's older that we got you started early, and that's why you listen to this music now at 13, 14, and it's not a phase, Mom, as the the memes as they go around on the interwebs so often say. Question number 13 for you, Robbie, comes from Brian. Is it a good thing for the salary cap if a playoff series goes to Game 6 or Game 7 in every series? I have to think the more money the league takes in, the faster the players' escrow can be covered, causing the salary cap to rise by a significant amount in the process.
Anytime a league can pull in as much money as possible, it's a good thing. So, yeah, I mean, any series that goes 6 or 7 games, each home team's at least getting 3 games worth of revenue from those games. So, I mean, yeah, as much money as the league can make, whether it's by ticket sales, merchandise sales, concession sales, whatever, the more they make, the easier it's going to be to make the numbers work and hopefully bump that salary cap up as much as possible. Hopefully this is the last year of it only a rising by $1, and hopefully next year when we're talking at this time, there's a more significant increase in revenue or increase in salary cap due to the revenue increases since COVID, which really, I mean, if you look before COVID, what the salary cap was going up, it was consistently raising a significant amount every year. And then COVID kind of put the whole kibosh on that. So, yeah, it would be great to see it rise more than just by $1 million, hopefully next season. But, yeah, anytime you get more revenue, it helps. An extra game or two isn't necessarily going to make the difference, especially compared to the 82 games that each team plays or the 41 home games each team gets, however you want to look at it. But, hey, anything that's getting more money into the owners' pockets or the NHL's pockets is going to help the salary cap in the long run. Question number 14 from Snail. If you could bring one active modern-day enforcer to Pittsburgh, who would it be?
This question is really open to interpretation. Me personally, I'm not in favor of enforcers or that style of hockey. But for the sake of the question, I was looking, and I guess we'll classify an enforcer based on the number of fights they get in. For Snail, I was looking at the fighting majors leaders through the 2022-23 season. Nick Delorier had a total of 14 fights, 9 away fights and 5 home fights. Veteran Patrick Maroon had a total of 12 fights throughout the season. Austin Watson had 12 fights. However, the player that I am going to go with for this question, since it was pretty much open to interpretation as to what modern day is, I'm going to go with Tanner Jeannot, who I believe plays for the he was playing for the Nashville Predators. He was traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning at the trade deadline earlier this season. He's 6'2", 208 pounds. He's a left winger, 25 years old. He'll be 26 at the end of May. In 172 career games, he has 35 goals, 31 assists for 66 points, 239 penalty minutes. So he can score a little bit here and there. He does have a 24 goal season to his name during the 2021-22 season with the Nashville Predators. During that season, he played in 81 games, 24 goals, 17 assists for 41 points, and racked up 130 penalty minutes during that season. So he definitely plays with an edge. His nickname is the Oxbow Ox in recognition of his physical play and his hometown being Oxbow, Saskatchewan. So that's who I would want. If we have to bring one enforcer, I would want this Tanner Jeannot, a young winger who can put the puck in the net here and there. Obviously, he's a big body, 6'2", 208. So that is my final answer. Let's trade Tanner Jeannot to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Question number 15, Robbie, comes from Snail. Rickard Rakell was a great deadline pickup in the moment, but I was skeptical when they signed him long-term. Malkin's wingers once upon a time were Aaron Asham, Patrick Hornquist, and Eric Fair. These were north-south players with size and the ability to create space for Evgeny Malkin. And Snail's question is, do you think we need a different look second-line right wing alongside Evgeny Malkin?
Rakell, I think, is obviously not going anywhere. They didn't sign. I mean, I know a new front office will come in, but when you have trouble scoring goals, you don't want to necessarily get rid of one of the guys who did score goals for you. So I think if Zucker comes back, you take a look at Malkin, Zucker, and Rakell in the wings. Again, you saw a bunch of different stuff go on with Malkin. Yeah, he's definitely had some interesting names skate alongside him at times during his career, but Rakell's, I think, obviously one of the best, at least true goal scorers. He can shoot. He had a great season this year. A lot of people were questioning that contract, so Snail wasn't the only one at all. But credit where it's due. That was, I mean, not just the contract, but the pickup to begin with last season at the trade deadline to get Rickard Rakell in Pittsburgh. One of the few good moves you can say that came from the Hextall regime. I like Rakell there. Does exactly what you want a second line center to do. He shoot first, he has a nasty shot, and he can pour him in the net. Give him a full year, another full year in Pittsburgh. I think he can get to 30 next year, no problem. So I like Rakell there. I have no desire. I really don't think, if we're looking at how they can restructure this team in the offseason, there's not much to the top six that should or needs to be done outside of whatever they want to do with Jason Zucker. But I think for the most part, you kind of roll into next season with that. That was not at all the problem. Question, last but not least, question number 16 from Snell. Is anyone else still confused why Brian Burke and Ron Hextall, of all people, made our team softer than ever? Heard rumors Mike Sullivan doesn't like the gritty big players and is an advocate for the punish them with the power play. It's tough to watch Sid do everything plus stick up for everyone.
The age-old debate of what kind of hockey is better to watch, whether you like the rugged, physical, enforcer-esque style, which I'm gathering from Snail's questions he is a fan of, or do you like the puck possession, speed, and skill, as Snail described it, the punish them on the power play kind of hockey? This debate has been going on for how many years now? I haven't heard the same rumors regarding what Sullivan likes and doesn't like from the kind of players. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't like those big, plodding skaters who it would seemingly contradict what made him successful when he got to Pittsburgh in 2015-16 anyway. So that would make sense. Punishing them on the power play. Well, the Penguins really, they didn't really punish a lot of people on the power play this season. That's going to have to be revamped, hopefully heading into next season. But Hextall tried to make them tougher, acquiring bigger-bodied forwards like Jeff Carter. Mikkel Granlund did not fit that description at all. I don't know what Ricard Raquel's current size and height and weight is. I don't think he is a massive forward. Regarding Sidney Crosby sticking up for everybody, that's what that's what a captain's supposed to do. He's supposed to stick up for his teammates. Everyone calls him a crybaby and a whiner, always complaining to the referees. I think he's a student of the game who is absolutely sticking up for his teammates. Is it true that the Penguins are a small team? Yeah, there's no denying that they are small in literal stature. They don't have a 6'5", 6'6", 230-pound forward bruising bodies into the glass every night. They just don't have that. It's hard to find a big, towering 6'6" guy who can skate effectively in this modern-day NHL when so much of it is predicated on speed and skill. So that 80s era style hockey is definitely of a bygone era. And, whether or not you agree with having a roster spot, saving a roster spot for a player like a Ryan Reeves, who is on the fourth line basically just to hit people into the boards every night, that's up for you to decide. Me personally, I don't think it's worth it. I think you ice the best 12 players you can in your forward lines and run with it that way. And like Mike Sullivan says, punish them on the power play, punish them with your speed and skill in your transition game, your puck possession, maintaining pressure in the offensive zone. You're not going to win too many games in 2023, 2024 by beating your opponent to death and smashing them into the boards. It remains an integral part of the game, that physicality. The importance of it has lessened, obviously, over the years. The Penguins are small. Will they get bigger? That remains to be seen. Who are they going to bring in? But if they do get bigger, don't get bigger and more physical for the sake of it and eliminate basically a roster spot in the forward group just so you can have a guy go out there and retaliate after the fact, after one of your stars gets injured. Because that's what happens. These Ryan Reeves types, they are going to go out there after something has happened. They're not going to stop something before it happens. That everyone thinks that's what Ryan Reeves does. He goes out there and stops guys from injuring star players before things happen. That never happens. It's Ryan Reeves going out there after somebody gets injured to try and drop the gloves. So I'll get off my soapbox for now and stop talking and debating the merits of physical play versus puck possession based play. And we'll leave the conversation there, and we will end the mailbag with me getting on and getting off my soapbox. So Robbie, we got through 16 questions this week. Anything else you'd like to add before we get out of here?
Nope. Enjoy the rest of your week. It's going to be, I don't know wherever you're at, but it looks like it's going to be another rainy and cold week. So if you're somewhere it's sunny, please go outside for me.
And for me as well. It is the start of May. My birthday is on Saturday, and I think the weather might start cooperating towards the end of the week. So hopefully I'll be able to go and do something fun for my birthday. And like Robbie said, Robbie and I, we don't live too far away from one another. He's in Johnstown. I'm south of Pittsburgh. The weather is basically the same here. Definitely not the start of May I thought it was going to be. Hey, we're one day closer to warmer weather, and that's what I'm looking forward to the most. For Robbie and Ogle, I have been Garrett Bahana. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Penscast Mailbag, and we will talk to all of you again this time next week.